Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're doing a real deep dive into, well, one of the most tangled stories in crypto right now. We're talking Richard Hart, or Richard Schuler, and his projects HEX and Pulse Chain. It's a mix of legal drama, big money controversies, and some interesting tech claims.
Absolutely. And our goal today really is to bring some clarity. There's just so much noise out there. We've pulled together everything we can, official Interpol stuff, actual court filings from Finland, investigative reports, technical breakdowns. We want to answer those questions you have. What's actually confirmed fact? What's still just an allegation? And what's pure rumor? Especially when it comes to, criminal records, how funds were used, and whether these projects even have a future.
Right. And we should probably start with the most serious confirmed stuff, the legal issues he's facing right now. This is the Finland situation, Interpol. We're talking active criminal charges that have basically made him an international fugitive.
Yeah, that's the critical piece to start with. This isn't just like a civil lawsuit about securities. This is international criminal law enforcement. The absolute key fact, December 2024, Interpol issues a red notice. That was requested by Finnish authorities. It's a global alert.
Okay, let's clarify that red notice for everyone listening. It gets thrown around a lot. It's not quite an international arrest warrant itself, is it?
That's a really important distinction, yeah. It's not a warrant. Think of it as a global request. It goes out to police forces in, 195 member countries, asking them to locate him and then provisionally arrest him. But the arrest is pending formal extradition from Finland. Still, it's a massive tool. It makes it incredibly hard for him to move around or live anywhere safely, unless it's maybe a country that doesn't cooperate.
And the charges coming from Finland, they're pretty shocking, honestly. It's a mix of major financial crime and serious violent crime. That combination feels quite rare.
It is unusual and very serious. The Finnish authorities have two distinct sets of charges on the table. First up, aggravated tax fraud. They're alleging a huge tax evasion scheme. We're talking June 2020 to April 2024, a 4-year period.
And the numbers involved sound enormous. Hundreds of millions of euros in unpaid taxes. What exactly makes it aggravated under Finnish law?
Right, aggravated means it's way beyond just, making a mistake on your tax form. Under their criminal code, it has to involve really significant financial damage, obviously. But crucially, it also needs proof of, particularly reprehensible conduct or a calculated plan to deceive to hide assets. There was a Helsinki police detective, Harry Sarastola, who basically said Hart's reported income just didn't match what the tax authorities estimated he was earning. So the investigation is looking at whether he deliberately gave false info or just systematically hid crypto profits for years.
Okay, so it implies intent, a deliberate large-scale deception, which explains the intensity of the international pursuit. But then there's the second charge, which is maybe more jarring for people who only follow the crypto side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. The second confirmed charge is assault. He's accused of physically assaulting a 16-year-old back in February 2021. This directly answers that listener question about whether there's a confirmed record of, violence in his past.
And the details in the Finnish filings, they're quite graphic. They paint a picture of, significant violence.
They do. The accusation is specific. It alleges he dragged the victim by their hair into a stairwell, violently knocked them down, and then punched them repeatedly 4 or 5 times in the face and head area, specifically mentioning the nose and eyes. The reports say this caused, significant injuries, bleeding, swelling, broken skin on the face. So those are the two charges, aggravated tax fraud and assault, that triggered that Interpol red notice.
And given the scale of the tax stuff, tied directly to his crypto fortune, what did Finland do to try and secure those assets, to stop them disappearing while they look for him?
Well, the Finnish authorities acted pretty quickly and decisively on that front to secure assets they could reach. Back in January 2025, they carried out some major seizures. This included, get this, over 20 luxury watches. The authorities documented their value at over $2.6 million US. They also seized millions of euros from Finnish bank accounts they found. And importantly, they managed to freeze some crypto holdings that could link to him. It shows this isn't theoretical. It's a very real, very active criminal investigation with tangible consequences already.
Okay, so that establishes the current, very serious legal threat from Finland and Interpol. But let's step back for a second. A listener specifically asked about his past record. Before all the crypto fame, Richard Schuler's earlier history. What's known there?
Yeah, if you look at the public record for Richard Schuler before HEX and Pulse Chain took off, sources do point to involvement in an earlier scheme, something related to spam way back in 2002, and apparently that situation actually went to trial. So it does establish a history of being involved in activities that attracted legal scrutiny. Long before he got into DeFi, it maybe suggests a pattern, some might say, of ventures pushing legal or ethical boundaries for financial gain.
Okay, interesting context. So back to the present situation. The Interpol notice exists because Finnish police couldn't locate him. He's effectively a fugitive. Where was he last known to be? And how did he manage to, well, disappear?
His last confirmed location, was Helsinki, Finland. He'd been living there around 2023. But as the investigation intensified, especially after those asset seizures in early 2025, the Finnish police officially stated they believed he'd left the country, and his current whereabouts, unknown since January 2025. So he is, by definition, a fugitive from justice, which is why that Interpol Red Notice system is now the main tool trying to track him down.
Right. That sets the stage clearly on the international criminal front. Now, we absolutely have to tackle the other huge legal issue, the SEC case in the U.S. A lot of headlines, especially in the crypto space, screamed, Richard Hart beats the SEC. We need to really spend time pulling apart what happened there, a technical dismissal versus, being cleared.
Yes, this distinction is absolutely critical. You really need to grasp this. The narrative that he somehow won't against the SEC is, well, it's common, but it's deeply misleading if you actually look at U.S. legal procedure.
So let's start with what the SEC accused him of back in July 2023. What were the actual charges?
Okay, the SEC filed civil charges. They had two main pillars. First, they alleged he ran unregistered securities offerings across HEX, PulseChain, and PulseX. And they claimed these offerings raised over $1 billion. That's billion with a B. Second, and this is just as important, they alleged outright fraud. Specifically, they claimed he misappropriated at least $12 million from those offering funds for his own personal, very lavish spending.
Okay, $1 billion in unregistered offerings, $12 million in alleged fraud. It usually means a huge, drawn-out court fight, right? Settlements, judgments. But this case just got dismissed. How did that happen?
It was dismissed, yeah. February 28th, 2025, by Judge Carol Bagley Amon. But here's the absolute key legal point. The dismissal had nothing to do with the judge deciding if the tokens were securities or not, and she absolutely did not rule on whether the fraud allegations were true or false. He didn't win based on the substance of what he was accused of doing.
So if the judge didn't rule on the merits, the actual accusations,
Yeah.
what was the reason for throwing the whole case out?
It came down entirely to a technical legal issue,
That was
lack
the-
of
the-
jurisdiction. The court decided the SEC hadn't done enough to prove they had the legal authority, the jurisdiction over Hart. I mean, yes, he's a U.S. citizen, but he was clearly operating mainly out of Finland at the time. For the SEC to apply U.S. securities law to something happening mostly overseas, they have to meet certain tests, like proving the offering specifically targeted U.S. investors, or that enough of the actual activity happened within the U.S.
Okay. So because the SEC couldn't convincingly show that the offerings were mainly aimed at Americans, or based in the U.S., the court basically said, sorry, this isn't really our turf to rule on.
That's exactly it. The jurisdictional argument failed completely. The SEC even had a chance to fix it. They were given until April 21st, 2025 to amend their complaint. To try again, basically. To find more evidence connecting the whole operation specifically to the U.S. market or U.S. soil.
And what happened? Did they try again?
Nope. They chose not to amend the complaint. And that decision effectively ended the civil case against Hart from the SEC. Which, sets a really interesting, maybe even scary precedent for other crypto founders operating internationally. If you base yourself outside the U.S. and you're careful not to directly target U.S. buyers, maybe you can sidestep U.S. regulators even with billion-dollar fraud allegations hanging over you.
Wow. That's the real so what, isn't it? It feels like a massive potential loophole. But let's circle back to the actual accusations. If the case died on a technicality, does that mean the claims about him pocketing $12 million the fraud? Are those now considered false?
No, absolutely not. And this is the number one thing you, the listener, need to take away. The dismissal offers zero vindication on the conduct. None. The SEC's detailed claims about fraud, about that massive recycling scheme in HEX, about him taking at least $12 million for luxury goods, all those factual allegations, they remain legally uncontested in court. They were never proven, but they were never disproven either. The court just never got to hear the evidence because the jurisdictional door was shut first.
So the evidence the SEC gathered, like details of that $12 million spend, it's all still there in the public filings, specific and itemized, but just legally untouched by a judge's ruling.
Precisely. And remember, the SEC had also laid out that alleged fraud in the first HEX offering in incredible detail, claiming that something like 94% to 97% of the 2.3 million Ethereum raised wasn't real investment, it was just recycling. Internal transactions between Hart and insiders to make it look like there was huge demand. Those are massive allegations suggesting the whole market was basically faked early on, that factual claim. Never addressed by the court, just bypassed because of where he was physically located.
Okay, so the civil securities risk from the SEC seems off the table now. What about criminal charges from the U.S.? A listener asked if he could still face criminal charges here, from the Department of Justice, maybe.
Well, the DOJ always has the power to bring its own criminal charges, yeah. Things like wire fraud or money laundering could potentially apply. However, they would almost certainly face the exact same jurisdictional problem that stopped the SEC, possibly even a tougher one for criminal cases. The DOJ would need to prove the scheme had a substantial criminal impact within the U.S. or targeted U.S. victims significantly. Given the SEC couldn't clear that bar for civil charges, it seems like a long shot for the DOJ. And as of right now, October 2025, the U.S. hasn't filed any criminal charges. So, bottom line, the Finnish Red Notice is the only active confirmed criminal threat against him currently.
Right. Let's shift gears then, away from the founder's legal status and towards the project itself, Pulse Chain. The marketing was huge, promised all sorts of breakthroughs. But a listener wants to know, what part of Pulse Chain is genuinely his idea, Richard Hart's innovation, versus what's just been, well, copied from other platforms? We need to dig into the tech here.
Okay, yeah, let's strip away the marketing gloss and look at Pulse Chain technically. Fundamentally, Pulse Chain is a hard fork of Ethereum. And not just like inspired by Ethereum, it's basically a near complete copy.
Can you break down what hard fork really means for someone maybe not deep in the tech?
Yeah.
If you fork Ethereum, how much work does that actually save?
Oh, it saves a massive amount of work. Think of it like this. Imagine photocopying a giant, complex textbook, word for word, then maybe change the book cover, maybe tweak the font size slightly. That's kind of what happened. They copied Ethereum's entire technical blueprint, the Ethereum Virtual Machine, EVM, that's the engine that runs all the smart contracts. They copied the basic way transactions work. And crucially, they copied the entire state of the Ethereum blockchain at one specific point in time. That means every existing contract, every single token, every user's balance on Ethereum got duplicated onto Pulse Chain. This approach bypasses potentially years, decades even, of development effort and billions in R&D. They just took Ethereum's system that's already been tested and proven over time.
Okay, so if the foundation is essentially a copy, what were the supposed innovations? The things Pulse Chain claimed made it different or better than Ethereum or other forks.
The claims really boiled down to tweaking some settings, aiming for better performance. Three main things. First, they aimed for 3-second block times. Ethereum's is around 13 seconds. So faster blocks theoretically means about 4 times the transaction throughput. Second, they promised much lower transaction fees, always popular. And third, they changed the tokenomics slightly, or reduced rate of new token creation, about 25% lower per block than Ethereum's rate at the time.
But the tech community wasn't exactly blown away by these innovations, were they? Why aren't faster blocks or lower fees seen as groundbreaking?
Because, honestly, those are pretty standard adjustments. Faster blocks, lower fees, different inflation rates. You can find those features on literally hundreds of other blockchains already. Other EVM-compatible Layer 1s or Layer 2 scaling solutions built on top of Ethereum. If you put Pulse Chain next to something established like Polygon or even Solana, technically, it just doesn't offer anything particularly new or original in its core design. Plus, faster block times aren't a free lunch. They come with engineering challenges, like potentially more orphan blocks transactions that get confirmed then dropped, which can actually hurt security and finality. It's a trade-off, not some magic bullet innovation.
And that brings us to the huge marketing angle, the largest airdrop in history. You said this was really just copying the Ethereum state.
Yeah.
What was the actual economic result of doing that?
The economic result was, frankly, pretty disastrous for the value of those copy tokens. When they duplicated the Ethereum state, they created these, well, you called them photocopy tokens earlier. That's a good way to think of it.
Well,
Let's call them P tokens, Pulse Chain tokens. So if you held, say, 100 Uniswap tokens, UNI, on Ethereum, suddenly you also had 100 PUNI tokens on Pulse Chain. But here's the problem. These P tokens had basically zero real-world value when they launched.
why? Why didn't they hold value if they were copies of valuable assets?
Because value in crypto, especially DeFi, comes from liquidity, real money backing it up, and utility things you can actually do with the token. All the real money, all the established developers, all the trusted applications, dApps, all the secure bridges connecting to other chains, they all stayed on Ethereum. So the Pulse chain duplicates were like orphan assets in an empty ecosystem. No major exchange listed them, no reliable bridges were pumping real value into them, almost no serious developers moved their projects over. Critics nailed it, I think. You can't just photocopy an asset or even a debt and expect the copy to be worth the same without a completely separate, massive investment and ecosystem building around it. And that just didn't happen for Pulse Chain. The price crash of those key tokens reflects that cold, hard economic reality.
Okay, so the tech wasn't really new, and the airdrop didn't create lasting value.
Let's swing back to the money side again, specifically the allegations about misusing funds. A listener asked, what do we know for a fact based on those SEC filings about him using project money for personal luxury items? Right. And again, the important caveat, these are the detailed allegations the SEC made in their complaint. They backed them up with blockchain transaction data. The case got dismissed on jurisdiction, yes, but these specific factual claims about the spending, about the transfers, they were never argued or refuted by Hart in court.
Okay, understood. So what were the specifics? How much did the SEC claim he diverted, and what did they say he bought with it?
The SEC alleged he misappropriated at least $12 million directly from the funds raised in the offerings. And they didn't just make a vague claim, they listed specific purchases. They did this presumably to show the scale of the alleged fraud, and also maybe to highlight the stark contrast between the project's supposed goal of decentralization and the founder living this incredibly centralized, hyper-luxury lifestyle funded by the project.
Okay, let's hear the details. This is where it gets really specific, right?
It does. The complaint mentions several high-end sports cars using exact dollar amounts. Things like a $534,916 Ferrari and a $314,125 Ferrari. These aren't guesses. They were citing specific transactions linked to these cars. Beyond cars, the filings documented over $2 million spent just on Rolex watches. They even call out one specific Rolex watch allegedly bought with offering funds valued at $1.38 million.
One watch for $1.38 million.
That's staggering detail. It goes way beyond just saying he spent lavishly.
Exactly. And probably the most talked about item was the Enigma. It's a famous, massive 505-carat black diamond. The SEC claimed Hart used $4.3 million of the allegedly misappropriated project funds to buy this specific diamond. So when the listener asks if he used funds for his own benefit, well, the SEC's answer, back to their investigation, was a very strong yes, with itemized receipts for millions in cars, watches, and that huge diamond. But the alleged financial gains go back even further, don't they, to the very beginning with HEX. We need to explain that recycling fraud concept the SEC talked about. It seems key to understanding how he allegedly gained control.
Yes, this is absolutely crucial to the fraud narrative. The SEC claimed that during the initial HEX offering, an overwhelming majority of the Ethereum that flowed in, somewhere between 94% and 97% of the total 2.3 million ETH collected, wasn't real investment. It was what they called recycling transactions.
Can you explain what recycling looks like in practice for someone who isn't watching Blockchain Explorers all day?
Sure. Recycling in this context is basically a form of wash trading to create deception. It means funds start in a wallet controlled by Hart or his close associates. They then move those funds through maybe one or two intermediary wallets and then send them right back into the official offering address, making it look like a fresh, new investment coming from some random person in the market. They were essentially just shuffling their own money around in circles.
So the point wasn't just to move the money, but to deliberately inflate the numbers, to make the public think there was this huge organic demand for HEX when maybe 97% of it was fake.
Precisely. That's the core of the allegation. By doing this repeatedly on a massive scale, they allegedly achieved two things. One, they created this powerful illusion of incredible public interest and momentum, which likely encouraged real, unsuspecting retail investors to jump in. And two, it ensured that Hart and his small circle of insiders ended up controlling the vast majority of all the HEX tokens that were created, which of course completely undermines any claim of the project being truly decentralized.
And did similar allegations follow with the Pulse Chain fundraising? Were those funds also immediately centralized, according to the SEC?
Yes, the pattern allegedly continued. Pulse Chain had its sacrifice phase, where people sent in crypto, raising about $354 million. The SEC complaint alleged that a huge chunk of that, specifically $217 million, was immediately transferred into a single private wallet, a wallet they believed was controlled directly by Hart. So you put it all together, the recycling allegations in HEX, the immediate consolidation of Pulse Chain funds, the detailed evidence of luxury spending. It paints a very consistent picture, at least according to the SEC, of extreme centralization and alleged diversion of funds.
Okay, let's turn to part 4 then, the hunt. We know he's a fugitive. We know Interpol issued that red notice. The listener asks, what are the real chances of Interpol actually catching him?
Well, looking at history and how international law enforcement works now, the chances of evading capture long-term are generally pretty low, especially for someone this high profile who operated in finance a sector with increasingly sophisticated tracking. That red notice fundamentally changes things for him. Travel becomes a massive risk. Remember, Interpol itself can't force a country to arrest someone, but the notice means any member country he tries to enter or even just interact with, officially like opening a bank account, is supposed to flag him to Finland and potentially detain him provisionally.
And we have seen other big names in crypto who went on the run eventually get caught, right? Like Do Kwon, Suzu. Does that history tell us anything here?
It definitely suggests that hiding effectively in today's interconnected world is incredibly difficult. Du Quan, the Terra Luna guy, managed to stay hidden for months moving around, but he was eventually caught in Montenegro trying to use fake documents. Suzu from Three Arrows Capital, he was arrested in Singapore's airport. The point is, global financial intelligence sharing, especially for things like tax evasion and money laundering, is getting really good. It closes off safe havens. Long-term evasion is tough.
Okay. Now, that specific rumor a listener brought up,
Yeah.
is it true he might have moved to Russia? And if he did, would that basically make him untouchable?
Right, the Russia rumor. Based on everything we've seen from credible sources, official statements, that appears to be pure speculation at this point. There's no actual evidence, no reliable report confirming he's in Russia. Officially, his location has been unknown since he left Finland back in early 2025.
But just as a hypothetical, because it helps understand the limits of international law, what if he were in Russia? How would that affect Finland's chances of getting him back?
Ah, now that's where geopolitics crashes into legal theory. Russia is a very unique situation. On one hand, Russia actually uses the Interpol system quite a lot itself. But on the other hand, they have a long history of being very reluctant to extradite people to Western countries, especially if diplomatic relations are bad, which they certainly are with Finland and the EU right now.
Why are they so reluctant? Is there some legal principle they use, or is it just politics?
It's often a mix. Russia doesn't have formal extradition treaties with many Western nations. And even when there is a treaty, they tend to interpret it very broadly, giving themselves a lot of discretion. They're particularly resistant if they can frame the charges as politically motivated, or sometimes even just purely financial crimes from states they see as adversaries. Aggravated tax fraud, that could potentially fall into a category Moscow might choose to ignore, especially if the person involved has significant wealth they might bring into Russia.
So if Finland put in the request to Russia, extradite hard for tax fraud and assault, Russia would basically make the final call based on its own interests, not necessarily on the legal merits.
Essentially, yes. He wouldn't be automatically safe. There's always a chance Russia might cooperate for its own reasons, maybe to score points internationally. But realistically, getting someone extradited from Russia to a Western European country, especially now, is a massive diplomatic and legal challenge for the requesting country. It's generally thought that high-profile fugitives can find a degree of temporary safety from Western extradition in Russia, but it always depends on Moscow's political mood at the time.
Okay, that clarifies the international pursuit angle really well. So finally, let's try to bring all these threads together. We have active criminal charges, the Interpol notice, these serious uncontested fraud allegations from the SEC, the documented centralization, the founder on the run. Let's address the listener's core question. Based on all of this, what are the odds of success for Pulse Chain going forward?
When you synthesize everything, the tech, the money trail, the legal status, the outlook for Pulse Chain, achieving any kind of long-term mainstream success looks, well, extremely unfavorable. The risk profile is just extraordinarily high.
Let's start with just the market. What do the prices tell us? How has the market reacted to this whole mess?
The price action speaks volumes, really. And it's brutal. HEX, which was the foundation of this whole ecosystem, is down something like 99.6% from its peak. It went from over 50 cents down to like fractions of a penny now in 2025. Pulse Chain's own token, PLS, is also trading at incredibly low levels, around 0.0000000028 last I checked. Market sentiment indicators, things like the Fear and Greed Index for PLS, are stuck in extreme fear. That signals widespread panic and basically zero confidence from the broader market in a recovery.
And those fundamental problems we talked about earlier, the copy tech, the centralization, the lack of real use cases,
Yeah.
how do they factor into the future prospect?
They're basically fatal flaws for building anything sustainable or trustworthy. First, that massive centralization risk we discussed. If the SEC allegations about fund control and recycling are even partly true, Hart effectively holds the keys to the kingdom. The entire platform's fate rests on one person, a person who is currently a fugitive. That's the opposite of decentralization. Second, the utility problem. What can you actually do on Pulse Chain besides speculate on the token price? Without compelling apps or real-world uses, there's no organic demand.
And the whole economic model, as critics point out, seems potentially unsustainable, right?
That's a major criticism, yeah. The projects often have features that look a lot like Ponzi schemes to critics, meaning the high returns promised to early investors or stakers seem to rely heavily on a constant stream of new money coming in from new buyers, or just from inflating the token supply. They don't seem to be generated by actual economic activity on the network, like fees from popular applications or real business use cases. Once that flow of new money or new belief slows down, the structure starts to wobble, which is exactly what the price charts seem to reflect.
But surely, the biggest anchor dragging everything down has to be the founder's reputation now, given everything we've discussed.
Oh, absolutely. It's likely insurmountable. Think about it. You've got an Interpol red notice out for aggravated tax fraud and violent assault. You have detailed, specific, multi-million-dollar fraud allegations from the U.S. SEC that were never actually disproven in court, and he's actively hiding from law enforcement. That combination creates a massive wall of reputational damage. No serious traditional financial institution, no reputable major crypto exchange, no established, credible developer is going to want to touch or build on a project led by someone under that kind of legal storm cloud. The basic foundation of trust you need for any financial system is just completely shattered.
So if the tech is copied, the money is centralized, the price is cratered, and the founder is a fugitive. Where does any remaining value or hope even come from?
At this point, the project's survival seems almost entirely dependent on the sheer belief, the faith, of its remaining core community. It's become less an investment in technology or utility and more a bet on the founder's personal narrative. A bet that he can somehow overcome global law enforcement and resurrect the project's fortunes. For anyone looking at it objectively from the outside, the risk seems almost total. Maximal risk, minimal rational basis for success. You know, this whole saga, it really forces us to ask a tough closing question, something for you, the listener, to think about when you look at other DeFi projects too. How much weight, how much risk should you assign to the human element? Especially when you have a central figure, someone not decentralized at all, who allegedly controls most of the tokens and is facing serious international criminal charges. How do you balance that against the supposed decentralization of the code itself? It really highlights this deep tension in crypto between the promise of trustless tech and the reality of very human, very centralized leadership risks.
That's a powerful point to end on. Synthesizing how the founder's alleged actions, both financial and criminal, directly impact the project's trustworthiness and viability is key. Thanks for walking us through all that detail, really helping separate the confirmed facts, like the finished charges and red notice, from the jurisdictional technicalities of the SEC case and the rumors from reality. And for breaking down the tech versus the marketing, it was a complex web, but I think this deep dive was absolutely necessary to get some clarity.